It is my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the board to the second event in our Leadership Summit series. Last week, we heard from Linda Schaefer, Chief Operations and People Officer of Checker, about the trends that are redefining leadership in the C-suite, and specifically the impact of human-centered leadership. Today, we will dive deeper into empathetic leadership with Katie O'Malley, founder of Encourage Coaching Chicago. Katie is a leadership coach and educator with 15 years of professional experience serving the nonprofit, corporate, and higher education sectors. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Katie.
Vicki, thank you for that lovely introduction. I'm so happy to be here today with you all. I'm coming in from Chicago. If you can toss in the chat where you are zooming in from, that would be awesome. I'd like to get a sense of where in the world everybody is. And as you do that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can jump right in. Awesome. All right, Chicago, California, Cleveland, Ohio. Love that. Cleveland rocks. This is great. Boston, Seattle. We got folks from everywhere. All right. My hope today during our time together is that we're not only going to be able to learn some of the practices and strategies around leading with empathy and listening, but also providing an opportunity to you all to get to know each other and do not necessarily networking, but connection building with one another, which is one of the outcomes of leading with empathy and leading with listening. So we're going to go ahead here and jump right in. This is a snapshot of me as a kiddo, pretty eccentric, pretty bold. This is my office at home. You can see some snazzy wallpaper, brightly covered things. Haven't strayed too far from this image, but I always like to share a little bit about who I am because it's important for folks to know who it is that they're learning from and alongside. So to start out, my bachelor's degree is actually in political science. Went to Miami of Ohio, in Ohio. So shout out to our Cleveland person there who's just across the state. After graduating from Miami in 2004, which was an election year, I went ahead, had the opportunity to work on John Kerry's campaign for president, and then transitioned into the nonprofit sector, doing fundraising and development for organizations like the Innocence Project in New York, and then the AIDS Foundation of Chicago, here in Chicago. During that time, I felt like there was a disconnect for me. I knew I wanted to make big impacts and create systemic change. The challenge was I felt distanced from that in those two roles, but couldn't articulate it at the time. So transitioned from social impact work into commercial real estate. And had I visited the Career Center in college or ever worked with a coach, they might have told me that's one of the biggest career missteps I could make. So after about 3 years in commercial real estate at CBRE, I went back to school at 30 to get my master's degree in counseling. So I'm trained as a counselor and therapist. I am not here because of my business acumen per se, but for my understanding of the human condition, human development, communication, how to effectively work alongside others. After receiving that degree, I went on to work at DePaul University, University of Texas at Austin, and then Chicago Booth. For the last 5 years, I've been working in the leadership development office with our full-time MBA students, working on developing their self-awareness, developing their empathic skills, and also their listening skills, and then spending a lot of time too working with the Booth Women Advance program. That's something that holds a really big spot in my heart. But during this time, I also got my board certified coach credential, at which point I went ahead and I opened my own private coaching practice. And it hit a tipping point this winter. I'd been sharing that with Vicki. And so my last day at Booth was actually March 18th, and I am now focusing my time fully in the coaching space, working with private clients, either in their career, leadership development, or small businesses. So putting all of that out there, it's been a winding and dynamic career path. But I know all of those experiences that I've had are actually what allow me to be here with you today and be effective in the content I'm about to deliver. Before I move on from this slide, are there any questions for me about who I am, why I'm here, why it's worth giving today a listen? Not seeing any hands or anything in the chat. Great, we will keep on moving through. So today, here's our learning agenda. The first thing we're really going to talk about today is experiential learning, what it is, why it matters for our time together today, and how you can use it with your teams, colleagues, clients to really create the change and transformation that you're looking for. Experiential learning has a deep tie to both empathy and vulnerability, so I'll touch on that when we get there. Then we're going to explore some key concepts around the core conditions that need to be met in order to facilitate change. I know when Vicki sent out the email for this session, it was very much focused on how do we transform our teams, how do we communicate more effectively, and to do that, there need to be some conditions that are in play before we can even jump in to the practices of empathetic leadership through active and empathic listening. So this is what we're going to get today. Can I get a show of hands or emojis? Is this what you thought you were signing up for? Thumbs up, thumbs up. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Rita. Okay, awesome. Great. Demetra, thank you so much. We'll go on to our next slide then. So sneak peek, experiential learning. What is it? So experiential learning was actually developed through grounded research by experiential psychologist David Kolb, who has his PhD both in education, but also the field of psychology. And I am just going to ask, Michael, can you read this quote from Dr. Kolb?
Learning is the process whereby knowledge is created through the transformation of experience.
Yes, thank you so much for that. So today we are going to be learning together and alongside each other. Your job is to bring in the knowledge that you have about yourself, your teams, the challenges you're facing. And my job is to help you transform those experiences into something that's going to help you develop and become the leader that you're looking to be through a set of different strategies and practices. So how are we going to do that? David Kolb's cycle of experiential learning starts with having a concrete experience. So when I put you in breakout rooms, you're actually going to be telling each other stories about the most challenging workday you've ever had. So start thinking about that, start reflecting on that. That's going to be the concrete experience that you share. You're going to be able to do some reflection with your partner. There will be someone observing you as you share and observing your partner as they listen. Then we're going to do some abstract conceptualization. So after you go through that cycle of listening to one another and receiving feedback on that, we're going to talk about what applications might look like for the future, and then start with some active experimentation. So get ready. This is highly participatory. You won't just be listening to me speak the whole time, but essentially, if we take out all of the jargon and all of the education language, what we're really talking about is you've had some experience where you've learned some things. I'm going to ask you to think about those things, consider how to apply them, and then apply them. That is the cycle of learning. This is also something that you can use with your teams if you're really looking for them to transform knowledge they have into something that can create change and be really impactful and help to impact others. So experiential learning. Demetra, I see your face. I'm wondering if I could get you to read this second quote from Dr. Kolb.
Sure. To learn from their experience, teams must create a conversational space where members can reflect on and talk about their experience together.
Demetra, thank you so much. In the chat, if people are feeling brave, why do you think I included this quote? Or put your hand up or come off mute.
So one of the points that comes to my mind is the conversational space. Just that's one of the things that stuck to me. So it's maybe being okay with vulnerability, opening up the space so that others can share as well and feel that it's okay.
Absolutely, Michael, I love all of those things, especially the piece that you shared about vulnerability. Part of creating change in your teams and organizations is being able to have actual dialogue, not perceived dialogue, but actual dialogue. And that's what we're really looking to do today. So in creating a conversational space, and you see him here referencing teams, team members, Dr. Kolb actually started taking his research in education, applying it to organizations and teams, because the same factors hold true. If we're not able to reflect on, think about, consider how we might apply, and then apply our new knowledge, there's very little chance that you're going to be able to move your team forward and create the impacts that you're looking to. So today, creating that conversational space, I like to call it creating a brave space, is what we're going to be learning how to do and trying to do. Vicki, I saw you pop off mute. What do you got?
There's a question about being able to be empathetic and have these conversations if, for example, the person you interact with actually does not pause to let you interact with them.
Yeah, so what you just brought up, Vicki, and whoever asked that question is a fantastic question. You are not alone in that. It happens to all of us. We are going to cover that later on in the deck. But what I can say is, or actually, I'm going to ask a question first. Why do you think a person talks without stopping? What do you think's going on there? If we're going to be generous.
If I'm generous, it's because I think they have a lot to share, maybe more than they have to receive.
Yeah, they have a lot to share. Oh, Dimitra, I saw you pop off too. Come on in.
Oh, I was just gonna say they just feel the need to explain what it is, like why they know that there's going to be potentially a conflict, so they want to explain their point of view.
Absolutely, absolutely. They want to get ahead of what other people might be thinking, nervous about others' conflicting points of view. Yes. Is it Madarahima? Did I get that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, great. And then great contribution. Thank you for that. Do you want to add anything while we have you on camera?
No, I just meant typically, I mean, I found myself speak more sometimes when I'm less sure about what I have to say. So it's that nervousness. Even as I'm speaking, I feel like someone else probably, I can think of what's going, I think I can guess what's going on in their minds. So I want to come ahead of them. So basically just that point.
Yep, absolutely. And so I appreciate the generosity that you've given the talkers and the folks who take up a lot of space. But it all boils down to, as humans, we are here on this planet to do two things: connect with others and feel seen and heard in those connections. And so when people are talking a lot, maybe taking up too much space, they want to be seen and heard. And they want to be seen and heard usually because they haven't been previously. And it could be reasons because they were too nervous, somebody cut them off. Yes, it is part of a personality trait, but there's a lot more going on there. And I'm going to talk about how we can work alongside those folks effectively in just a few slides here. All right, so I told you were going to get a little bit of a different perspective here than potentially other sessions, because I am not really a trained business person. I am a counselor and trained as a therapist. And so I'm bringing in stuff you probably haven't seen or heard much about, or at least I'm hoping. But Dr. Carl Rogers, pictured here, was the founder of person-centered therapy. And that is the way that I really work with my clients, is from a person-centered approach. What he was looking to achieve in the development of person-centered therapy was really looking at what are the conditions that are necessary for folks to create change within themselves. Interestingly, these conditions can also be applied to facilitate change in others, in groups, in teams, and in organizations. And so there's three key conditions that we're going to talk about. The first is congruence. Congruence, you also, you can refer to it as genuineness. We're all familiar when we meet someone who's either being genuine or we feel like they're being disingenuous. Show of hands, either through fun emojis or putting your hand up. How many of you have interacted with a person that you believe to be disingenuous? Hands up, check mark. Awesome. And what, oh, wonderful. Madhu, can I ask, what did that, how did that cause you to behave when you were interacting with the disingenuous person?
I guess I'm more watchful. I have my guard up. I'm less likely to trust what they're saying.
Yeah, for sure. And imagine if that's running through an entire team or an entire organization, right? So what we really want to do is create a space where we are modeling congruence and genuineness for those on our team, so that they know it's not only okay to show up in that way, but it's actually really needed. And that starts with us. The second is unconditional positive regard. This goes to the word that I used earlier, generosity, being generous with our thoughts and our feelings and our behaviors towards someone because we just don't know. We can't know everything there is to know or where they're coming from, and showing up from a space of, I don't like to say positive intent, but having an optimistic outlook on what it is that they are trying to do is a great way to think about unconditional positive regard. And finally, the application of empathic listening. So for the next 5 minutes or so, we're going to talk about congruence and unconditional positive regard. And then we're going to hop into what empathic listening looks like, and you are going to have the opportunity to practice. So when we're talking about congruence or genuineness, we're talking about being real and authentic. I know authenticity is a big buzzword right now. It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But what we're going to think about it as in here today, and I encourage you to think about as when you go back into your workplaces or even your personal life, is that authenticity is the alignment of our inner experience, so our feelings and our thoughts, with the outward expression of those feelings and thoughts being aligned through our behaviors. So it looks a little something like this. Full disclosure, I failed geometry in 8th grade, but what we have here is an equilateral triangle, which is a nice representation of congruence. So came back full circle for me, still had to use the language anyway of geometry, but what we're trying to do is align those thoughts, feelings, and behaviors to demonstrate our genuineness to others. If I could, again, get a show of hands or drop in an emoji in the chat, how many of you have had feelings and thoughts that were not then necessarily aligned with your behaviors or how you were interacting with someone? Oh man, we have some of the most genuine people I've ever met on this call. That's fantastic. Martina, thank you for putting your hand up. I'm like, holy cow, maybe I shouldn't be here facilitating this session. They don't need it. Martina, would you mind sharing an example of what that looked like?
Okay, we're going to be vulnerable this morning already.
Yes, yes.
Excellent. So, you know, in my personal sort of development work that I have done, I have realized that I tend to express my care for people in a what people will not take it as a care, meaning that when I approach people in a what could be offensive manner myself, is it a matter of me showing care to protect them from what could happen in the future. So yeah. I think that that probably is not how I am perceived, that I care for them, let's just say.
I see. Martina, thank you so much for that show of vulnerability and really kicking us off in that way. Can we give it up for Martina? It's hard to do that in a group of strangers at the end of the week. So Martina, it's exactly what you shared. You know, wanting to communicate one thing, even if we are feeling or thinking in a different way. But sometimes we can be direct and candid without being harmful. Something I like to call compassionate candor, but we can talk about that in another workshop. So what I want you to do, take a couple of minutes, let's say 2 minutes, want you to jot down some notes. on this reflection question. So again, engaging in that experiential learning model, reflect on when were you at your most genuine? What were the conditions that allowed you to show up in that way? Because we want you to be able to replicate it in the future. So take about 2 minutes here. If you want, go off camera, and then I will invite you all back on in just a minute here so we can share out. Right, about 30 more seconds. All right, if we could all come back together. I'm wondering, what did you come up with? What are you willing to share with the group? I would love for someone to be brave and come off mute, someone we haven't heard from today. All right. This is a hard one. Michael, would you like to share?
Sure. I just want to leave a little bit of space because you did add someone who hadn't shared yet. So
I know, but go ahead, take it away. I appreciate your engagement.
no problem. I'll share. It's more of a general kind of thought that I had, and that's when I know it's what I've written down here is there's an atmosphere that's also been set where you really feel comfortable. And almost the other side of that party is also exhibited such behaviors where you're almost encouraged even to share how you want to really be genuine. And that's really been impactful for me. So that's what I'll try and replicate, where it comes back to my earlier comments about just really feeling open and not ever being judged in that criteria. To your last question, I also reflected on that a little bit more, which is that whole genuine part. It's tough where you don't feel the other party maybe sees something similarly to you. And even if they don't, that they're open to hear something that's different from how they might feel. So those are a few points that I jotted down that I was reflecting on.
Absolutely. And what you bring up there, Michael, what you brought up at the end, this idea, if we can demonstrate that we have a stake in what somebody else has to say. And when I say a stake, interest, curiosity, and openness to actually hearing them and trying to understand, they will be much more likely and even feel invited to do the same for us just from modeling that behavior. And the challenging part of that is, it's like, I'm already working so hard and now I have to be the one to go over and above and do this. What I would say to that is, yeah, it might feel like a big hill to climb in the beginning, but after some practice, it becomes really natural. And you can always ask yourself the question, this is what I always ask myself, do I want to be right or do I want to be effective? And it's 9 times out of 10, it is in that latter space. And that's where I really have to lean into my congruence. All right. So unconditional positive regard. This is the second condition that you need to facilitate change, whether inside yourself or on a team. Carl Rogers, continuing with him for a bit, has this beautiful passage from his book that talks about person-centered therapy. And he writes, when I look at a sunset as I did the other evening, I don't find myself saying, soften the orange a little on the right-hand corner, put a little more purple along the base and use a little more pink in that cloud color. I don't do that. I don't try and control a sunset. I watch it with awe as it unfolds. Why do we think I included this passage?
Control.
You said control, Michael? Yeah, it is impossible to give someone else unconditional positive regard if we are trying to control the conversation, if we are trying to control what it is that they share, how it is that they think, how it is that they feel. In letting things unfold and being present in that moment, you're going to see something much more beautiful than what it is you are trying to disrupt, control, or prevent. And so unconditional positive regard is really letting go of control, letting go of where the dialogue or conversation is going, and really allowing people to be open in sharing their experiences. Now, that sounds simple and it's like, duh, Katie, of course, but simple does not always equate to easy. And so the very first step in being able to provide someone unconditional positive regard is suspending judgment. What I can tell you from my own experiences is that if there was a scale or a spectrum for judgment from 0 to 100, I would probably be a 99 on that scale. So I am constantly working to suspend my judgment, whether it's with clients, whether it's with team members, friends, family. This is a very difficult thing to do because our judgments make us feel safe, make us feel like we know things. And every time we have a judgment or we make an assumption, we actually get rewarded with dopamine in our brain because our brain has found a pattern, it's found a connection, and that's part of its job. So it can start weeding out nonsense and noise. We have to counteract that kind of chemical stimulus and start learning how to unlearn that practice because it's just part of our nature. After we are able to suspend judgment, that's when we can start leveraging empathy. Empathy, another big buzzword that's going around. It is not new by any stretch of the imagination. It's part of the human condition. And how I like to think about empathy is like a muscle. It is something that you can get stronger, that you can flex, that you can train up on. This is not you have it or you don't, very much like leadership. It's not you're a leader or you're not. Leadership is a practice, not a position. Empathy is also part of that leadership practice. And that is what we are going to go into now. After we take just 2 minutes to think about these questions. First one being, when have you been treated with unconditional positive regard and what was the impact? And then I also want you to think about how might this stance impact relationships on your team? So again, take 2 minutes, jot down some notes, just so you can have these as a written artifact as you move forward. So 2 minutes, I'll call you all back together when it's time. Seeing some heads coming up. Would anyone like to share about a time they experienced unconditional positive regard and what the impact of that was?
I can just share a quick line.
Please,
I feel
thank
like
you.
generally speaking, impact is I just feel more confident. I'm more likely to speak out my mind. I'm more likely to do more, share more. I want to believe that leads to overall better experience for everyone involved, the whole team. Mm-hmm. But basically, I'm less afraid of folks judging me. I know it's a supportive environment. I'm more likely to give more.
That is perfect. Those are all the right answers. And that's what we want. That's what we want from our colleagues, from our teams, from our loved ones. We want them to feel the way Madhu did. And so with that, what I want us to do now is take a few minutes to watch a video from Dr. Brene Brown. She has been all over the place lately. She has a new Netflix special. She has a new book out. But I do want to share a little secret. She has been doing this work since the late 90s, and it only became really popular in the last few years. All of her research is what we call grounded theory research. So she's using actual participants to come up with what are the elements that impact vulnerability, that impact shame, that impact our ability to show empathy to one another. So I know a lot of you may view her as some kind of self-help guru, but she has her PhD in social work, and I have been a super fan of her since the 2010s. So let's give this a watch together. We're going to learn a little more about what is the difference in demonstrating sympathy and empathy, and then we're going to go into the concrete practices of empathy.
So what is empathy? And why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
All right. I saw some smiles. I saw some laugh emojis coming up. I saw some head tilts that was kind of like, really? Someone would say that to somebody else? What are your takeaways? And a takeaway could just be something you liked or you found helpful. Chat is welcome too if you want to just drop it in the chat instead of saying something out loud. Dimitra, I saw you come off mute.
I was just going to say, I think a lot of times, especially in the workforce, people just kind of want to find the answer, the solution. And so the easy thing is to have a sympathetic approach to it, because having the empathy also makes you feel maybe go to a place, like if a coworker experienced a medical emergency and you've recently experienced that, like you don't want to bring up those feelings for yourself and don't consider that actually would be helpful. Yeah. Or a lot of times I think when something terrible happens, I'm going through this right now in our nonprofit. And when something terrible happens, oftentimes people don't either say something more sympathetic or just let me know what I can do, making that person have to think about it instead of offering like something more concrete, or they say nothing because they're just too afraid to say the wrong thing.
Right. Too afraid to say the wrong thing, when sometimes all that needs to be said is what we saw at the end of the video, right? I don't know how to support or help you right now. I am just so happy you told me, and I'm here for you. Demetra, the other point you brought up about the medical emergency, I thought that was a great example. One of the things that we know about empathy is that if we're going to be empathetic, we have to connect to emotion in ourselves, right? And it's not about necessarily us having the same experience as somebody else. My lived experiences are different than Demetra's, different than Vicky's, different than everybody's on this call. But there are 5 key emotions all of us have as humans. And if I can connect to the anger, the sadness, the joy, the disgust or the fear that someone is feeling, if you can connect to one of those 5 things, that's all you need to do to demonstrate that you understand, and to start creating that space, to Demetra's point, that feels brave and not scary to share. Okay, so now that we've talked about what empathy looks like and how it's different than sympathy, we know that a key component of empathy is listening. And there are 4 levels of listening that we need to talk about. The first level, the most basic level, is listening for the pause. So Vicky, you had brought this up earlier in a question that a participant had submitted. What do you do if the person is not pausing? And so part of level 1 listening and listening for the pause is, my goodness, if you're just waiting for the pause, then you're not even listening. You're not even listening at all. We have been socialized to that listening is something we do so we can respond and have our own airtime. That is not what listening is. So if you find yourself listening for the pause, you are at this level 1 listening that isn't going to generate or yield the brave and empathetic environment that you're looking for. So I encourage you to no longer wait for the pause. Just sit until they're done, because eventually they will be done. They will either need to take a breath, a sip of water, or they'll just run out of things to say, and there will be a pause. So stop waiting for it. It's going to come. The second level of listening is this idea for waiting my turn. So now, instead of, we've got you through not just listening for the pause, but now you're listening, right? So you can have your turn to speak. Waiting your turn isn't necessarily a bad thing. This is level number 2 out of 4, so you're kind of halfway there. But when we're waiting for our turn, it means we're waiting to respond. We've already concocted something in our minds about the direction this person is going, or exactly how we want to refute or disagree with what they said. And the moment that we start to formulate our response, again, we've stopped listening. And when we stop listening, we lose the ability to remain empathetic. We lose the ability for folks, we lose the ability to demonstrate unconditional positive regard. And so again, if you're listening for the pause or you're listening for your turn, those are not elements of active or empathic listening. Next up, we have what's called reflective listening. What you all know as active listening, it's what's out there in the community. Active listening is, I almost wish there could be a huge gap between level 2 and 3, because there is. But the issue with active listening is that it's often very performative. So it's doing things that are helpful, like nonverbal behaviors, nodding, making good eye contact, body language. These are all things that we want you doing. But again, if you're focusing on performing listening, again, you're not really listening for understanding, which is what we're trying to get to. So there's listening to respond, there's listening for your turn, there's listening to perform. And then finally, where I'm hoping we can get to and get you the set of skills by the end of today is empathetic listening, or also empathic listening. Empathic listening is listening for understanding. When we listen for understanding, it is a process, again, that allows people to feel seen and heard. It eliminates our need to respond and to come up with the right answer or the right point, because what we're really trying to do is understand the other person and demonstrate that we have understood them. So what ends up happening is they come back to us and say, well, yeah, what's your perspective on this? Because you just invested so much time in them. Empathetic listening is where we can get to true dialogue. And again, it's that idea by modeling this behavior, members of your team, potentially clients, other members of your social network are going to start responding to you differently. Empathetic listening was the focus that I had for 3 years in my counseling program. And I got to tell you, there are some days I'm still not particularly good at it. Tends mostly to be with my partner when he doesn't load the dishwasher correctly, but that is a conversation for another time. But empathetic listening is a choice, and it's something that needs to be practiced, just like any other muscle. So I say empathetic listening, you're like, Katie, that's great. How do we actually do it? So apologies. I'm saying lots of ums and ahs today. Empathetic listening goes a step beyond active listening, which is the attending behaviors and minimal encouragers that you so often read about providing to other folks when you're in conversation with them. Attending behavior is very much about nonverbal communication. So eye contact, leaning forward a little bit to demonstrate interest, nodding, smiling, kind of matching the disposition of the other person. Minimal encouragers are small words or phrases that'll keep people talking. So in addition to nodding your head, it's like, yes, yes, please say more, keep going. Attending behavior and minimal encouragers are great. Those are very much the active listening behaviors that you often see or hear about or read about. That is our basis. I know all of you can do that, so I'm not going to spend much more time there. The second thing that you do after engaging in that active listening is starting to collect observations. You're going to be collecting observations about the other person's body language, their vocal tone, their vocal qualities, what their nonverbals are telling you. Is what they're saying actually matching their affect and how you're observing them behave? I also want you collecting observations about yourself. Sometimes we want to jump in and respond because we feel triggered or we feel angry about something that somebody has said, or we feel really connected to it and we want to share in that experience. I want you observing yourself and the things that you're feeling when you feel that inclination to respond, because that's good data for you and it's good to use later on when we climb up the pyramid. But observations, while it's very active, you are not verbally sharing that out yet. You're collecting data like a good boothie should. Open and closed-ended questions. You all know how to do this. One of the things that we've been great at doing since we were kiddos is asking questions. Open-ended questions start with words like how, what, when, where, a lot of the 5 W's. Closed-ended questions are usually yes or no questions, and they both have their place. Open-ended questions are when you're trying to generate more information. Closed-ended questions we want you to use for clarification and clarification only. These have their space, but you have to demonstrate that active listening at the bottom of this pyramid, then collecting your observations, and then at that point you get to ask a question. One of the things that I like to say is you have to earn the right to ask a question, and that comes with putting in some listening labor up front before you can do that. Paraphrasing and summarizing is the next step in this pyramid. Paraphrasing and summarizing often conflated, but they are two very different things. So paraphrasing is taking what somebody has just shared with you, probably over an extended period of time where you might have been waiting for them to pause or waiting to respond. And instead of responding, what you're going to do is listen to what they said, put it in your own words, and reflect it back to them. That does two things. One, it shows that you're interested. Two, it allows them to say, you know what, you got that right. Thank you so much. Or that's not quite what I was saying. Let me try and explain it a different way. You're going to get so much information just from paraphrasing. Summarizing, I love to use towards the end of the conversation. It shows that you've been paying attention to what they had to say the whole time. Summarizing collects, again, data and observations, and that you've collected through your questions and observations to then share it out and demonstrate you've been along with them for the entire ride. Then finally, we have reflection of feeling. This is a more advanced empathetic listening skill, but it gets to that idea that we were seeing in the video. You need to be able to connect with your own emotions, and the five big emotions, right? Anger, joy, sadness, disgust, and fear. Once you can connect to that feeling in yourself, you can say to them, you know, after listening to you, it sounds like you're really afraid of X. Or after hearing you share your experience, it sounds like that's something that made you feel really joyful. How can we do more of that moving forward? Reflection of feeling is really powerful. And again, it also lets you clarify with the other person what it is that they're truly feeling, so you can demonstrate understanding. So this is our beyond active listening pyramid. So we have our active listening here at the bottom. I like to say active is attending behaviors, minimal encouragers. Anything else that you can add in on the way up is really going to increase the amount of empathy that somebody feels from you. So what we're going to do in just a minute, we are going to scoot into breakout rooms, and you are going to be put into triads. Again, going very much along this experiential learning process. So there's 3 people in the room. Everyone has the opportunity to play each of these 3 roles. Everyone has the opportunity to be the listener, the speaker, and the observer. And you can determine that when you get into the room. So the speaker will have 4 minutes to talk about their most challenging workday to date. The listener is going to practice utilizing the skills in the pyramid. Vicki, would I be able to get you to drop that handout in the chat?
Yes, I will do that right now.
Awesome, thank you. Everything that I just went over on the slide deck, Vicki's going to put the handout in the chat so you can download it, have it with you to practice some of these behaviors. And then the observer and speaker will provide feedback to the listener for 4 minutes. And so the listener listens for 4 minutes, the speaker speaks for 4 minutes, and then the observer and speaker provide feedback to the listener on their use of the skills in the pyramid. Oh, and then we'll say at 8 minutes, you're going to rotate roles. So essentially, we're going to be bringing you back here right around 12:20, 12:21. Here's the challenge, because I know boothies love a good challenge. Even alumni boothies still love a good challenge. So you have this pyramid. One of the things that I think is really important is for us to challenge ourselves to not do the things we already know how to do. And I know all of you are brilliant at asking questions, putting queries out there. So I am taking away your ability to ask questions in this exercise. Attending behaviors, observations, paraphrasing and summarizing, reflection of feeling. All of those are going to generate information for you, and this is a safe and brave space for you to test it out. When I was in my counseling program, we would be recorded doing sessions with clients, and for every question that we asked, we were docked a point from our final grade. And so it's because we didn't pay them all of that money to learn how to do something we already knew how to do. And questions are really easy to lean into. Questions can also make your conversation partner feel like they're under interrogation. So use these other pieces, those are the pieces that really show empathy, not the questions, even though they do have their place. So